Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is the last of the 4 webinars speaking about the transformation, inner transformation through yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. And it is good for us to remind ourselves that really any scriptures or sacred texts, we need to always ask, what relevance does it have to me? What am I expected to do to try to understand? So here we have been, as it were, there is a whole dialogue between Arjuna and Krishna. Who is Arjuna and what is Arjuna? And similarly, what is Krishna? So keeping that question in mind, really any one of us, whosoever is willing to face our real situation and is engaged in life, every life has struggle, has battle, if you like. The word battle can sound rather too dramatic, but each one of us has a struggle. So we are all Arjunas. May not be quite as skillful as he was, but we try. So then on the other hand, Krishna, at least a dozen times in the Bhagavad Gita, says that he is seated in the heart of everyone, in the mind of everyone, actually even in the body of everyone. Let me just quickly show a few of these remarks of Krishna. Here, I am the self that abides in the heart of all beings. And I am the beginning, the middle, and also the end of all beings. Then, of course, he invites, devote yourself fully to me as the supreme. Renounce all your actions consciously to me. Take refuge in Buddhi Yoga. Be always one with me in heart and mind. And I have already spoken about the fact that Buddhi Yoga is the main yoga that Krishna teaches. But let's look at a few of the other remarks of it. Everything, he says, is born from the union of the field and the knower of the field. And then I am the knower of the field in every field. This is a very important idea, that Krishna is in everything. Another way of saying that since Krishna, or ultimately as he identifies himself with Brahma, is really the highest level of consciousness, but that in each manifested being, or even any what we would call thing without consciousness, from the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita, and that was also true in ancient Greek philosophy with Plato, for example, that everything has some consciousness. So Krishna, as he says here, that I am the knower of the field in every field. Here, then, that he is also seated in our body. For example, those who undertake violent austerities torture the aggregates of the elements in the body, and also torture me, who is seated within the body. So, as I said, Krishna says this really many, many times. For example, again, I am lodged in the heart of all. From me are memory and sacred knowledge, and also disputation. Verily, I am that which is to be known by all the Vedas. I am the knower of the Vedas and also the author of Vedanta. So we see a very large numbers of times he says, I am seated in the heart of everybody or everything. And this is important to realize, that in the whole of the Indian spiritual or philosophical perspective, there is really, strictly speaking, no creation myth. There is what we should call an emanation myth. Brahma, which is the label for the highest reality, did not create the world. Brahma became the world. The classical metaphor which is used is actually in the oldest Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, that as the spider web comes into manifestation from the very substance of the spider itself, then the spider can move anywhere on the web as well as away from it. Therefore, the whole question which has been a strong theological question in the biblical tradition, whether God is wholly immanent or wholly transcendent. That issue really does not quite arise here in this context. But strictly speaking, everything in the manifested world is Brahma. There is not a distinction between sacred and secular. This is a very fundamental difference from the biblical traditions. And in fact, in the next set of webinars that we mentioned already, I'm going to focus on many very fundamental similarities in the mainstreams of spirituality, as well as very radical differences, which lead to many, many consequences, even in our social attitudes. So here we come back for the moment here, that Krishna is lodged in the heart of everyone, whether it is good or bad from our point of view. In fact, in India, for example, in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, transformation of consciousness is not aiming at going from bad thoughts to good thoughts. That's not a bad idea by itself, but that's only a stage. What the transformation actually aims at there is to go beyond all thought, good or bad. So it's beyond good and evil, which generally from the biblical point of view is always a little problematic, where there is always a strong contradiction between good and evil, and at the end of the days the evil will be defeated and only the good will remain. Nothing like this is assumed in India. So we continue therefore to see, for example, Krishna also says, I am the cunning of the cheats and the splendor of the splendid. After all, the cheats are also coming from Krishna. I have to keep reminding my friends, even in the biblical tradition, the devil did not create himself. Devil is also created by God. And in fact, if you are interested, especially the book of Job, the very first chapter as well as the second chapter repeats it, when all the sons of God were gathered together, among them was Satan. So we should not imagine that Satan is a self-created individual entity. No, here as Krishna is saying, I am the cunning of the cheats and the splendor of the splendid. Then of course continue to read this. I am victory, I am effort, I am the truth of the truth tellers. I am Krishna among the Vrishnis. Vrishnis, this is a tribe to which Krishna belongs. And Arjuna among the Pandavas. I am the power of the ruler. I am the policy of the conqueror. I am the silence of the secrets. I am the wisdom of the wise. Basically really trying to say that he is in everything and he is everything, which is a way of identifying himself with Brahma, which will be another way of saying it. Of course, in the Bhagavad Gita, the expression shifts between something which sounds very personalized God as well as something which is transpersonal or non-personal. And one more remark here again of Krishna. At the end of many births, a wise person comes to me, realizing that all there is Krishna. Such a person is great soul and very rare. Really, as a tribute to my father, for whom this was a very important shloka, I will say this in Sanskrit. Bahunam janmanam ante jnanvan mam prapadyate Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatma Sadurlabha. Now, how does Krishna reside in us? Here I draw your attention to three very correlated or interrelated words. This slide doesn't quite convey this properly here, but let me draw your attention to. There are three words: Swabhav, Swadharma, and Swakarma. Swabhav is essential being, inner nature, and Swadharma is the essential responsibility corresponding to Swabhav. And Swakarma is the necessary action that corresponds to Swadharma. Dharma has no practical meaning unless it leads to some action, which is what we started out with, that dharma is connected with what is the right action, and yoga is connected with what is the right actor, and that no action can be right according to Krishna until the actor is right. So now the suggestion is that each one of us has an essential nature or an inner nature. That is my swabhav. And then Krishna goes on to say that the supreme Brahma, which is imperishable, swabhav, the inner being, is called Adhyatma, the highest self. Another way of saying that, the highest self, as I have already remarked on, in India, the deepest self or the highest self is identical with Brahma, the highest reality. So, what is Krishna saying? That Swabhav is the highest self. Our Swabhav, for each one of us, is a particle of Krishna or a particle of Brahma. This is a very important idea. So, consider this. Then, he says that one is actually driven very strongly by what is one's inherent nature. Here, if in your egoism you think, I will not fight, your resolve will be in vain, for your nature will compel you. What you do not wish to do because of delusion, O son of Kunti, that's another name for Krishna, for Arjuna, you will do helplessly, bound by your own swakarma, born of your swabhav. The Lord is lodged in the hearts of all beings, O Arjuna, and with his power, he turns them all around and around as if mounted on a machine. Therefore, a great deal of emphasis on swabhav and swakarma. This is the point I wanted to make here, because we need to be searching for what is my swabhav. Swabhav is inner being, and very strong suggestion in India, actually in the Bhagavad Gita also, that right from birth one has certain predilections, certain tendencies based on even the actions or activities in our previous lives. If I were already somewhat of a searcher in a previous life, in this life I begin from a slightly different level than I will if I were not a searcher in a previous life. And therefore the suggestion that, strictly speaking, that is actually the basis of the caste system. Of course, the caste system, like many things in every tradition, gets degenerated. Now it simply becomes a matter simply by birth. You belong to a certain caste. Otherwise, each one of us has a certain swabhav, a certain inner nature. And if that inner nature calls me, let us say, to fight for justice, then I belong to the Kshatriya caste, warrior caste. If it invites me to essentially engage in learning and teaching, spiritual search, then I belong to a Brahman caste. So, in a way, of course, as I said, this gets all degenerated. Just to remind you, in the Mahabharata itself, there are two great spiritual teachers. Krishna is one of them, and Bhishma is another. Both of them belong officially to the warrior caste. They don't belong to the Brahman caste. And on the other hand, the person who is really the great teacher of archery and weaponry generally is Drona. He's called Dronacharya, the teacher of Drona. He belongs to a Brahman caste. So one does not need to get so occupied with the caste as it has now degenerated. But the important point is that each one of us has some swabhav, which is particle of Krishna. And the call for so-called transformation is, how can my swabhav gradually be more and more refined, that it becomes Krishna's being, which he calls Madbhav. my being. Krishna repeatedly is inviting all the serious yogis to come closer and closer to Krishna's own being. So, right from the beginning, if you like, there is a resonance between my being and Krishna's being, my swabhav and Krishna's madbhav. And the invitation of any practice of yoga, as I keep reminding people, yoga isn't just standing on one's head or standing in the Nataraj position, and that the purpose of yoga is to find one's identity with Krishna, or so that the deepest self discovers its identity with Brahman. That would be a more classical way of saying in the Upanishadic literature. So, then the question is that a repeated reminder from Krishna that it is important to follow your own essential responsibility or swadharma. He says, it is better to follow your own swadharma, though imperfectly, than another's, even if well done. In undertaking actions regulated by your swabhav, you do not incur evil. O son of Kunti, the inborn work or swakarma ought not to be abandoned, even if it is flawed, for all undertakings are clouded by defects as fire is by smoke. He repeats this remark actually more than once. Maybe I have the other quotation here also. Then, what is the real purpose of swakarma? Which will be another way of saying what is the real purpose of swabhav. As I said, swabhav has a resonance with madbhav of Krishna. So the corresponding actions are, as he says here now, let me read it. Hear from me now how perfection is found by one who is content in undertaking one's swakarma. When your swakarma is in the worship of the one from whom all beings originate and by whom all this is pervaded, you reach perfection. So, my actions can be in the service of something, a relatively minor deva or a minor god, for example, the god of wealth or the god of fame. There is no reason to be against any of this. All these forces are there, all these devas or gods or energies are there, and one can have one's action in the, or one's swakarma, or corresponding to my action, in the service of any of these. But what Krishna is obviously saying, that when this swakarma is in the worship of the one from whom all beings originate, and by whom all this is pervaded, you reach perfection. Which is why then this remark of Krishna, offering all your actions to me, mindful of your deepest self, without expectation, without self-occupation, struggle without agitation. Mai sarvani karmani samnyasya adhyatma chetasa nirasha niramamo bhutva yudhyasva vigat jvara. What is important again and again to see here how strongly Krishna is inviting everybody to engage in their right action. There is a very strong streak of spirituality in India, which is very eager somehow to say, as if we should get away from this world is just illusion, as if my being incarnated was really an error, practically the whole manifested universe seemed like a mistake, and that we should just retire into some cosmic consciousness without any action, without any engagement with the world. This streak certainly exists, but I am completely surprised why people would find this so strong as if in the Bhagavad Gita. Here, repeated remarks from Krishna to engage in the action. And he himself is constantly engaged in action. And let me just actually see if I have this next slide here. Oh, first of all, before going to Krishna's actions here, let me just remind you that the Swabhav, because if I can become aware of my Swabhav, that's already a particle of divinity in me, or a particle of Krishna in me. Then it's a little bit like this remark of Michelangelo. I saw an angel in the stone, and I chiseled and chiseled until I released him. That is the function of yoga. Chiseling of the stone that I am, all my mindset, my feelings, my body, all this is the stone in which the angel actually resides. So one doesn't need to be against the stone. But beginning from there, the whole purpose of yoga is chiseling and chiseling to release the angel. And in that context, we again see here Krishna's call here. The yogi who has no egoism and no selfishness. So before you call yourself a teacher of yoga or a practitioner of yoga, a yogi who has no egoism and no selfishness, who has friendship and compassion for all beings and hatred for none, who is impartial to pain and pleasure and is forgiving, who is ever content, self-controlled and firm-willed, and whose mind and attention are given up to me. Such a one is my devotee and is dear to me. It's very useful to keep reminding oneself of this, because it is very easy to say, I am a devotee of Krishna, or that I am a yogi. I can now more easily understand why the yoga teachers don't so much emphasize the Bhagavad Gita, because it will be too much of a demand. But it is very important to keep coming back to this idea that a whole total radical transformation of oneself is required. Increasingly, of course, then Krishna, as I said, overall yoga is Buddhi Yoga. It has several components, which gets classified as Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, or pronounced as Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, which is to say yoga of action, yoga of knowledge, yoga of meditation, but then yoga of devotion and love, Bhakti Yoga. More and more emphasis. But here I would like to very much draw your attention to one or two things here. One is that he does not even mention the word Bhakti Yoga until the 8th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, because more mayhem has been created by religious fanatics in human history by claiming that they love God or love Krishna or love Christ, and that furthermore Christ loves them. Why should Christ love me or Krishna love me? What have I done to deserve this? It is precisely why so much emphasis is placed in any serious teaching on the necessity of transformation. So that I could actually be worthy of being attended to by Krishna or by Christ or by God. It is actually more important that Krishna loves me rather than that I love Krishna. Because any benediction, any grace is going to come from him to me, not from me to him. I can keep loving him. What is going to result from that? Unless he loves me. maybe my love can also invoke his, but that is not going to be easily done unless I follow the corresponding practices. For example, first of all, just to read this, one who strives after me with an unwavering yoga of love. Bhakti yoga, by the way, is not only love, bhakti is also worship, dedication, and always has a verticality to it. Arjuna can have bhakti for Krishna, but Krishna doesn't have bhakti for Arjuna. This is a very different word. In the New Testament, we have the word agape, which has a slightly different meaning, although generally speaking much the same meaning. But there the disciples can love Christ and Christ can love the disciples and the disciples can love each other, and each time the word agape is used. But one would not use that word bhakti as when Krishna loves Arjuna, it's a different word, priya or prem. And it's not the same word bhakti. Bhakti has definitely a verticality to it. But in any case, come back here again. One who strives after me with an unwavering yoga of love passes beyond the forces of nature and is prepared to become Brahma. I keep reminding you, this is the goal of yoga practice, to become Brahma. I am the foundation of Brahma, the immutable, the immortal, and I am the foundation of the eternal Dharma and endless joy. Then here is again emphasis on the Bhakti Yoga. As I said, that after really more or less the 8th chapter onwards, more and more emphasis on Bhakti Yoga. But only after right action with Karam Yoga and right knowledge or understanding through Jnana Yoga, then it makes some sense to speak about love. Otherwise, it always leads to sentimentality and fanaticism. History of religions is full of this. So it's actually very important to notice this, that Krishna does not invite people to this whole bhakti yoga or yoga of love and dedication and worship until almost the middle of the teaching. By love one comes to know me, who and what I am in essence. Earlier Krishna had said, those who know me can love me. So there is a spiral movement between love and knowledge. And knowing me in essence, one enters into me, undertaking all actions, constantly trusting in me. One reaches the eternal and imperishable abode by my grace. And there is a very strong suggestion, particularly emphasized in the great Christian classic of spirituality, the Cloud of Unknowing, that thought or knowledge cannot bring us to God or to Krishna or to Brahma. But love can. Here is a remark from the Cloud of Unknowing. Thought cannot comprehend God, and so I prefer to abandon all I can know, choosing rather to love him whom I cannot know. Though we cannot know him, we can love him. By love he may be touched and embraced, never by thought. This is the Cloud of Unknowing, a great classic. We don't know who the author is, but an Englishman. It's very interesting to emphasize this point here because several years ago in England, the Temnos Academy had invited me to actually give a talk on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras and the Cloud of Unknowing. And it's interesting that the Yoga Sutras not even once mention the word love. if anybody questions this, they can check. And on the other hand, the cloud of unknowing is constantly speaking about love. And the important point I tried to draw there was that in fact at the heart of both of them is exactly the same practice. Because the cloud of unknowing very much emphasizes the presence of another cloud called the cloud of forgetting. That everything that we know, we need to place below the cloud of forgetting, which is exactly what vairagya is for Patanjali. But as Patanjali goes on to say in the Yoga Sutra, that the higher vairagya arises only after one has had a vision of the transcendent being. Purusha is the word he uses there. Which is really to say, only if I am actually in love with something that I do not know, but I am drawn to. Because it is seated in my very swabhav, in my very being. I'm drawn to it, but I do not know it and cannot know it. And then I, as it were, become unknowing to everything, and I forget everything that I know. That it is something beyond that. So vairagya is really placing everything below the cloud of forgetting. But why would I do this? Unless I am in love with something much subtler, higher, beyond the cloud of unknowing. So at the heart of vairagya is actually love, which may seem slightly unusual. I was very happy to discover that Vivekananda, a very great sage in India, more or less towards the end of the 19th century, died in 1901. He made this remark that at the heart of vairagya is love. I was delighted to discover this. So here we come back to the bhakti yoga, which is really required precisely because anybody who is at all serious about knowledge sooner or later discovers the limitations of knowledge. As I have even earlier said, even if I had the combined intellect of Einstein, Aristotle, Nagarjuna and Shankara, I cannot know all there is to know. Therefore, a willingness to be surprised, or as I last time quoted from John of the Cross, a knowing by unknowing. All this sounds very enigmatic, but it is important to realize, on the other hand, that this is the very nature of spiritual mysteries, unlike scientific mysteries. Scientific mysteries, in principle, can be solved. I would have been a bad PhD advisor in physics to allow a student to take on a problem that cannot be solved. Occasionally it happens that one has a wrongly framed problem, or we don't have sufficiently acute instruments to actually get to the solution. So a student may end up wasting a few years trying to solve something that, strictly speaking, can't be solved, or at least cannot be solved at present. But spiritual mysteries, even in principle, cannot be solved. Solved in the sense that if Einstein solves a problem, then I don't have to waste my time. He can publish it. The Buddha, we might say, solved the problem, even published it in the sense that he gave a discourse with the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha. That still does not free me from having to wrestle with this. So, spiritual mysteries cannot be solved, but they can be dissolved. If somebody stays with contemplation, with the practice of yoga, then sometimes the mystery is dissolved. Then one does not deny the mystery, one is not afraid of the mystery. In fact, in general, people celebrate the mystery. Uday Shankar danced the mystery. Bach wrote music for the mystery. Einstein and Newton did physics to celebrate the mystery. So everybody does what they are good at. But they are celebrating the mystery rather than publishing solutions of the mystery. So then, continuing here Krishna's remark, devote yourself fully to me as the supreme, Renounce all your actions consciously to me. Take refuge in Buddhi Yoga. Be always one with me in heart and mind. The very first day of this webinar, or first webinar, I had mentioned that Buddhi Yoga is the main yoga that Krishna teaches. Here, this is almost the end of the teaching in the 18th chapter. Again, a reminder of this. And submitting all of one's actions consciously to Krishna. What is very important here is to also indicate, this was particularly striking to me, that one of our great astrophysicists in India, Narlikar, some of you may know his name, he had published a theory of the creation of the universe, which was not accepted, but he was very highly regarded. This was his favorite shloka in the Bhagavad Gita. I have expounded to you the sacred knowledge which is profounder than the most profound knowledge. Reflect on it without leaving anything out. Then do what you wish. And I had a conversation with him, and he said the reason he especially likes this shloka, that Krishna is not asking Arjuna to just obey him. He's teaching him something and then asks him to reflect on it without leaving anything out, and then do what you wish. This is a very important aspect of the teaching in India generally, and there are many reasons for this. I have already indicated some of that. The main predicament or the main source of all our difficulties from the perspective of the Indian sages is ignorance, avidya or agyan, in the Bhagavad Gita also. And therefore, the solution is a knowing of a subtle kind. Whereas in the biblical tradition, the source of all our problem has been the disobedience of the will of God in the Garden of Eden by Adam. And because we are progeny of Adam, therefore we carry all those problems, which is what becomes the doctrine of the original sin in Christianity. So it's very important to realize that there are many, many distinctions between the very radical distinctions in the Indian tradition and the biblical tradition. We'll have occasions to remark on this in my next set of webinars, but right now let me continue here. And this is the reason, in any case, this great astrophysicist very much admired. This was his most favorite shloka in the Bhagavad Gita, he said. Then there are actually shlokas from 1863 to 1866. I'm quickly skipping two in between. They are regarded as the more or less the essence of Krishna's teaching, or Charam Vidya or Charam Shloka, etc. But it's very interesting that having so far very much emphasized that Arjuna must undertake the right action corresponding to dharma, and even at the very end he says, have you listened to our dialogue about dharma carefully? But here, this is a very interesting comment. This is actually the last teaching comment of Krishna. Abandon all dharmas and take refuge in me alone. I will deliver you from all evil. Do not be troubled. Sarva dharman paritajyam mamekam sharanam vraja. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshishyami mashucha. And it's rather interesting, having so much emphasized dharma, now he says you can forget about all of these dharmas and just come only to me. Of course, this he is able to say only after Arjuna is transformed, that he would naturally do the right thing. We have this remark of, I think it's St. Augustine, who said, love God, then do what you wish. So here is an invitation from Krishna. If you can actually wholly devote yourself to Krishna, who is now identifying himself with the highest reality, with Brahman, then you do what you wish. You can forget about this dharma, or this is my duty, that is my responsibility. This is absolutely beyond any good and evil state. But as I said earlier also, it is very important to be careful that one does not imagine that I am loving God unless one has undertaken the right action, the right knowledge. Or, as I said earlier also, it is more important that God is loving me than whether I am loving God. Because if God is loving me, then he or she or it can give me some benediction, some grace, can bring some meaning to my life. Which is why it is very important to keep in mind, keep asking oneself, why should Krishna love me? We have actually a very helpful remark of Christ. Occasionally, a disciple would say, Lord, I love you. This is what he said. Whoever keeps the commandments that he has from me is the man who loves me. And the man who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I shall love him and reveal myself to him. And you will dwell in my love if you keep my commandments, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and dwell in his love. I suggest to you, it will be very difficult for you to find in any of the four canonical Gospels Christ saying, I love God. He always said, I obey God. And then God loves me, which is precisely as he says, if his disciples obey his commandments, then he can love them. We are always very eager to have God love us without asking, why should he, it, she bother to love me? How have I qualified for this? Krishna is very clear here. In truth, O Arjuna, it is only by undivided devotion one can know me, see me in my essence and enter into me. Then he uses the name for Arjuna here, Parantapa, which may be useful for you to know, literally means the tormentor of the enemies. Why would he especially use this word here for him? Because don't forget, to love Krishna is being hindered by all my habits, all my self-love. I can't love Krishna if I'm loving myself. So therefore, always this is the requirement to conquer this enemy. Earlier, last time I mentioned that kama, selfishness, is the enemy that Arjuna has to fight. So one who does my work and has me as the supreme object, who is devoted to me and is free from attachment and is without enmity to any being, such a one comes to me. So remember, does my work. Krishna is not eager that you just hang around there doing nothing and thinking, oh, this is Maya. This is certainly nothing to do with Krishna's teaching. Here then Shankara is a very well-known Indian philosopher, actually highly regarded spiritual sage, because Arjuna is being taught many times in the Bhagavad Gita. There is no shortage of practical teaching that Krishna has given. The whole practice of yoga has to do with this. Everything to do with karma yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, all that is to do, that is the practice. But then it's very nice to be chanting Krishna's names, saying Krishna loves me, going to do the rituals, turning the beads of the hands, as Kabir reminds us, man ka pherat yug bhaya, bhayana man ka pher. The beads have been turning many times, but the beads of the mind have not turned. And same problem here. Liberation, Shankara reminds that just saying medicine, medicine, medicine is not going to cure the disease. Just saying Krishna, Krishna, Krishna is not going to bring you to Krishna. So, liberation cannot be achieved except by the perception of the identity of the individual spirit with the universal spirit. This is the aim of yoga. Let me keep reminding you. Universal spirit is Brahma. Individual spirit is my own essential being. Disease is not cured by saying medicine, medicine. One has to take the medicine. Deliverance is not achieved by repeating the word Brahma, but by directly experiencing Brahma. This is Shankara. In general, I'm not really a great fan of Shankara myself, but he was a very remarkable philosopher on the other hand. So, whole purpose of the Bhagavad Gita, in a way, one might say, was in this case to bring about the transformation of Arjuna. And therefore, by implication, any of us can be transformed if we would follow the teaching. And what is the transformation? Here is the beginning stage when the Bhagavad Gita begins, when Arjuna says, my very being, that is Swabha, is afflicted with the flaw of pity and weakness of spirit. My mind is confused about dharma. I am your pupil, for I have taken refuge in you. Teach me. Keep coming back to the idea of what is Krishna. If it is true, or at least possible, that Krishna represents my deepest self, of which I have an element deep within me, according to all the sages in India, then Arjuna turns to his deepest self for advice, for awareness of the whole situation. And then at the end, he is able to say, my delusion is destroyed. I have recollected myself through your grace. O infallible one, I stand firm, my doubts are dispelled. I will act by your word. It's not a question of just obeying Krishna. He has understood something. And this is the transformation. Essentially, one might say, initially he is confused about dharma, now his confusion is ended. But in the process, a lot of teaching had to be given by Krishna, and this is where Arjuna can actually say that he will now follow or carry out the words of Krishna. Karishye vachanam tav. Here I am happy to remind you of a remark of Madame Jeanne de Salzmann, my own teacher in the Guruji of teaching. This role of intermediary, it will be your place, your individuality. The word individuality is important to emphasize because this is the first time one can become indivisible. One can be internally unified. Otherwise, one is really not an individual. One is a multivisual. And then she says that will be your individuality. To recognize that by yourself alone you can do nothing. To acknowledge your dependence on higher forces. This is the practical meaning of yajna that I have been speaking about, or yajna. Implication that we need to be assisted by the subtler or higher levels of energy, the devas or angels if you like, because otherwise I can fantasize as if I have created myself, I have created my body and my mind. All this is fantasy. If one begins to see the largeness of the cosmos, then it is easier to understand that I am not running the universe, even my own universe. In fact, this is in the very beginning I mentioned, there is the blind king. In fact, to realize that I am blind to my own kingdom. The whole Bhagavad Gita can be taken completely externally, but also internally. Okay, continuing here, only then will you be able to serve to maintain an order, placing yourself voluntarily under a law. This is very important thing. This is exactly what Arjuna is now doing. Because he understands something, so he is voluntarily saying that I will carry out your word. He's saying this to Krishna. We can be, as she says here, either an unconscious slave or a conscious servant. These forces are very large. Krishna himself said earlier, I had shown that slide earlier, that if you think you will not act, you'll be forced because of your nature. So you can unconsciously, slavishly act or become a conscious servant. I personally think conscious servant is rather very high. Maybe Christ could be a conscious servant. The Buddha could be. We should simply say how to be a willing servant. That's a little closer to us. But if I am willing to be a servant of something subtler, higher than myself, then one would not lack clarity about what is the right action I need to do. And in that sense, then one has no choice. Again, maybe I remind you, particularly I'm imagining most of you have at least nominally a Christian, Judeo-Christian background. Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane on the eve of his crucifixion is not eager to be crucified. In fact, this is what he said: if it is possible, let this cup pass me by. But then what does he do? He submits himself as a conscious servant. What he said was, yet not my will, but thine be done. That's exactly what Arjuna is doing. So, then to remind ourselves that both Arjuna and Krishna are needed. In fact, if there is really one lesson of practically all the scriptures, certainly in the Bhagavad Gita, that without God or Krishna or Brahman, it cannot be done. Without human beings, it will not be done. Putting specifically in the context of the Mahabharata, one could then say, without Krishna, the battle cannot be won. But without Arjuna, the battle will not be won. Both the divine source as well as the practical human action are required. One could put it completely internally. Both my deepest self, which can be above the battle, as well as the self that engages in action. Both are required. And this is the very last shloka actually in the Bhagavad Gita, in which the person who is really is Sanjay, who has been, for this particular occasion, has been given the special grace that his clairvoyance and clairaudience. He can hear at a distance, listen at a distance, and see at a distance. And then he is the one who is actually reporting to the blind king what is taking place. And then at the end, this is the very last shloka, he says, this is my firm conviction that wherever Krishna, the master of yoga, is, and Arjuna, the archer, is, there will surely be splendor, victory, prosperity, and righteousness. Now, therefore, the suggestion that I would like to make is for us to search for what is my swabhav, which is to say, what is my inner being? What is the particle of Krishna in me? And then what is the dharma or the responsibility or duty that corresponds to it? And then what will be the action that corresponds to it? Coming back to these three words that I used earlier, swabhav, swadharma, swakarma. They are very intimately related. So then I am suggesting this exercise. Oh, first of all, here, maybe before that, I have this quotation from the Bhagavad Gita. One who does my work and has me as the supreme object, who is devoted to me and is free from attachment, is without enmity to any being, such a one comes to me. And exceedingly dear to me are those devotees who, full of Shraddha, here I'm translating this as faith. Shraddha also means confidence, trust, many things. It's not faith in the ordinary religious sense. Who, full of Shraddha, carry out the eternal dharma described here and make me their one supreme aim. So there is never any escape from what is the dharma or the action that I need to carry out. And then, oh Arjuna, there is nothing at all. Then you see Krishna gives his own example, which is why I said earlier I am a bit surprised that people want to move away from this world as if no action is required here, as if we are not responsible for the maintenance of the planet Earth. Here is another remark of Krishna. Oh Arjuna, there is nothing at all that I need to do in the three worlds. There is nothing that I do not have or have still to gain, yet I am engaged in action. If I were not ceaselessly engaged in work, all these worlds would fall and would perish. Therefore, at all times remember me and fight. So, it is very important to be engaged in the struggle. That means to be engaged in the action, in the battle. At the same time, to remain above the battle. So here is just a general conclusion. Without Krishna, the battle cannot be won, but without Arjuna, it will not be won. Life is struggle, and none of us has a choice about participating in the battle of life. The real question is how to be a good warrior engaged in the battle and at the same time to discover and connect with the Krishna deep within ourselves, one who is above the battle. I would recommend, if you wish to have this exercise, what is the main call of your own inner being, your Swabhav? Remember, Swabhav is the particle of divinity or the particle of Krishna in each one of us. And what is the corresponding action? Swakarma. And then what does this, or what or whom does your work serve? Each one of us is doing something. What do our actions serve? Are they serving the highest divinity in me or not? This is a question to be raised. Then, basically, to remind you that there are really earlier, in passing, I have occasionally mentioned many common features of the great spiritual traditions. There are two main streams of spirituality. One is the biblical one, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. The other is the Indian one, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. There are many, many common features of them. But there are many radical differences which affect the whole culture, which affect our relationship with each other, with the planet Earth, with everything. So it's good for us to therefore be aware of them, but I occasionally have been mentioning them in passing, but we'll have a whole set of 4 webinars starting in November. So here is some information about that. It's going to be called Nourishing the Pilgrim Soul, Spiritual Search East and West. 4 webinars in Saturday 25th November and then December 296. If you're interested, you can register at this place here. I should especially remind my Indian friends, at present there is only difference of 10.5 hours between the central time where it'll be 10 a.m. central time. So it's 8:30 p.m. in India. In November it'll be 9:30 p.m. in India. This is because of the time change here, which we don't have in India. So and some of this has been very much discussed in one of my books published by Quest Books called The Pilgrim Soul, A Path to the Sacred Transcending World Religions. I'm afraid religions in general have done more harm to spiritual search than any other institution, and we need not to be against them, but we need to find ways of being free of them. Those who belong to one particular religion exclusively cannot belong to God. That's my very firm and clear conviction. Thank you very much. If any of you have any questions, please write, although we won't be able to display them here, but I can respond to them, and the organizers are very helpful, Mary McNanny and also Jim Bosco. They can send by email to everybody. Thank you very much.